Hello travelers, Boardman21 here, and today we're going to discuss Puncture. Now, Puncture is one of the first skills that we're doing that's going to be able to be either ranged or melee depending on the weapon you're wearing. So we're going to have some examples of using it as a melee skill. We're going to have some examples of using it as a ranged skill. We're going to swap weapons just to show you what some of the nodes do. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to go over the pros, the cons, some suggestions for the build. We're going to go over every single node, what it does. If it's a skill changing node, I'm going to show you exactly what it does and give you some examples of it. And then we're just going to talk about the skill in general, ways to build it, ways that it's viable, and in my opinion, some of the reasons why it's not as viable as the other skills. As many of you know, Puncture is not as widely used as a lot of the other skills for the rogue class, and I'm going to go over some of the reasons why I think that is. Of course, all of this will be in my opinion with my experience with it, which is in no way the best or the only opinion that you can have about the skill, and plenty of people do like Puncture, and it is viable. You can use it. So let's start with some of the pros. Now, the skill tree of Puncture is awesome. There's lots of different ways to build it. You can use it either as a melee skill or as a range skill, depending on your weapon. So it's good for both the Blade Dancer and for the Marksman. That's a lot of variety, which is really cool to have skills that have that much variety so you can use it the way you want. The problem, some of the cons with the Puncture, is that Puncture itself isn't as good as it should be. There are skills that attack faster, so why would you use a slow attacking Puncture if you could instead use Flurry and attack 2, 3, 4 times as fast with a skill like that? If you want to apply ailments with it, while Flurry does have its effectiveness of applying ailments reduced, I believe it's 60%, it attacks so fast that it can override that and still do more dot damage than Puncture can. If you look at Puncture's tooltip, it says that it comes with a 30% chance to inflict bleed, and that bleeds will have a 30% increased duration. That sounds like a really cool passive default thing to have with Puncture, but the problem is that Flurry can attack faster and can make up for both that duration and that 30% chance. The main problem with Puncture is that you can't scale more bleed with a stat with it. So for instance, if you know the skill Serpent Strike on the Primalist, for every point of attunement, I believe, it might be strength, but I believe every point of attunement or dex, one of them, you get 4% more poison chance with that skill, and it comes with 140% poison chance right off the bat. Puncture should have at least a 100% chance to bleed by default. And I know what you're thinking, there's so much bleed inside of passives and the idols and everything that you do with the rogue in general that it can make up for that. But all of those sources can be used with any other skill, and it doesn't really make Puncture stand above them. Puncture itself should come with at least 100%. In my opinion, 200% chance to inflict bleed. It should keep the 30% increased duration, and then for every point of dex on your character, it should gain another 4% chance to bleed, as well as 1% bleed duration. That would make this skill very viable in terms of competing with the other skills, but as well as stand out. So for instance, if I want to attack fast, I'm going to use Flurry and apply ailments with Flurry over Puncture. If I want an AoE skill, Puncture is not an AoE. Even if you build into the Mirages, the AoE is kind of nice, but then the mana gets expensive. I would rather use Shadow Cascade, or I would rather use Detonating Arrow. You know, whether you play Marksman or if you play Blade Dancer, it's a middleman that doesn't have its specialty quite to the level that it needs to in order to perform to where more people would use it and it would be cherished as a top skill. So like I said, it should definitely come with more bleed chance by default, and it should scale. You should be able to scale it with the points of dex or one of the stats in order to give it more bleed chance and even possibly more bleed duration, so that it scales linearly as you get better and better gear and put more points into passives and get those stats like dex higher. Alright, let's go ahead and start down into the bottom left. Let's talk about charging the skill first. So first, to get there, you're going to have to put some points into timing, and timing increases the damage multiplicatively, but it also reduces the attack speed. Now, reducing the attack speed for the skill in itself sucks, because it already attacks slow, and now you're even reducing that multiplicatively. But if you go into charging, it's not such a big deal, because the attack speed doesn't matter. You're charging for a set amount of time anyways. Then we have Stay of Execution. When you put a point in here, it means that Puncture can now be charged, and when you charge it, it will last for up to 1 second. Now in that time, you can let go of it at any time, and with some of the nodes that we go into later, you can do more damage with that, or it'll increase the range. But if you hold it down for the whole second, it automatically releases and then goes and hits the enemy. Now, if you're playing as a melee character, it increases the range by 100%. I don't necessarily agree with that because I'd rather, since your targets are all going to be on you at this point, unless they're ranged, and if they're ranged and far away, that range isn't going to be enough to hit the target, that I believe that should be a damage, or it should be more bleed, or it should be something other than range. I don't believe the melee should be ranged. And then of course the bow damage gets damage per second when charged, and that makes sense because you're already going to have a ranged attack and go super far with it. So I really like that you get both of those. I almost feel like you should get range and damage for both of them instead of melee only getting range and bow only getting damage. But you can build into damage later. With 5 points in Thrill of Anticipation, you get 50% more damage per second. Now, I hate that it says per second because you can only charge it for 1 second. That's the cap. It automatically releases. But with 5 points here, you get 250% more damage with it. And that's really effective if you charge for the whole second. And then with 1 point in Knight's Descent, you can increase that charging speed by 100%, which means you can do an attack every half second. You'll also blind the enemy on hit, and you can do a lot more damage with it. If you're playing as a bow ranged, you can get 350% more damage. As a melee, you can get 250% more damage along with that 100% range within every half second. So let's go ahead and show you what that would look like. Let's put these points in. We'll put 1 point in timing, we'll put 1 point in stay of execution, 5 points in thrill of anticipation, and 1 point in Knight's Descent. And now I'll show you an example of doing both a melee and a ranged version of it. Alright, now when you use Puncture and you charge it up, it's supposed to charge for 1 second, and if you take that other node, it's supposed to only charge for half a second, but give you the full effect of the full second of charge, but you get it to go off every half second. However, it stays at 1 second, and just to prove that, we're going to go ahead and time it here, and when I attack, we'll try and time this perfectly so that it's all lined up. So when we hit 6 seconds, I'll just go ahead and start using it, and you'll notice 2 attacks, 3 attacks, 4 attacks, 5 attacks in 5 seconds. So you're only getting 1 attack every second, even though it specifically says in here above Knight's Descent that your charging speed is increased by 100%. I thought maybe, okay, maybe that means you can get 2 seconds worth in 1 second, so you get double the benefit. But if you push the alt, if your maximum charge is 1 second, this will reduce the time it takes to reach maximum charge to 0.5 seconds. It literally says that, and you still get the benefit of the 1 second. So there's a slight bug with that, and maybe that's why it felt so bad every time I tried to use it, is you're actually attacking at half the speed that you should be to get that benefit. So let's hope they fix that in the future. We'll have to put a bug report on that on the forums after this video. Alright, now the next node that I want to discuss is going to be Penumbral Ambush, and this creates 2 Mirages. You cannot use this with the charging, or at least if you're supposed to be able to, it's bugged and it doesn't work. But if you're not charging and you're building this skill any other way, this turns it from a 0 costing skill into a 15 mana costing skill, which means you can no longer use it as a generator, and it's officially a spender. So you'll have to use another skill to generate mana, or you'll have to just wait long enough to regen your mana naturally and just attack a bit slower. But with 1 point in this, it will create 2 Mirages, so you basically get 3 attacks in one. However, those attacks can't hit the same target, but it looks really cool, and I'll go ahead and show you this ranged. You now have 3 attacks like that, which is really cool. Really kind of opens up the AoE with it. But again, all of these can only hit 1 target each. And then if you play it as a melee, you get 3 stab effects, which is really cool. And I almost did a build on this, but it just felt so bad with how much mana that it spent, and the fact that you had to end up using another skill to generate mana. It would have been cool if it had a way to negate that mana cost, or even if it didn't have a mana cost, or if it was less than 15. But it just feels bad because it becomes a slow using skill. Alright, the node that we have next is Scale Bane, and what this does is it converts all of your bleed chance into poison chance and all of your physical shred into poison shred, which is really awesome. I love conversions like this with skills because it allows you to build it different ways and to do different elements of damage, which is awesome because maybe in multiplayer it becomes important that many of your other players or teammates are poison based, and so you can simply put 1 point into a node in a skill and become poison based with them if you were using, say, Puncture as your skill of choice. Then we have Seized Prey. This increases hit damage against slowed enemies as well as immobilized enemies. You can get a lot of extra hit damage out of this. It is multiplicative. With 2 points in Inescapable, you can get more hit damage per stack of slow in the target. Now with 2 points in this and 3 stacks of slow in the target, it's only 30% more hit damage, but that's still more damage. Then you can go with 1 point in Sealed Fate. Every 10 seconds, your next puncture immobilizes enemies on hit, causing them to be unable to move for 1 second, and this will boost the damage that you do with the hit damage against immobilized, but unfortunately that's only 1 second out of every 10 seconds, so make it count. And there's no buff icon for this, so you don't know when that 10 seconds is going to come. Then we have Debilitation, and this node, when I first looked at, was going to be my favorite node. It told us that we could stack as many ailments as there are in the game on an enemy and get more hit damage based on how many ailments were on them, which was a really cool hybrid build of being able to do as many ailments, put slow, put shock, put poison, bleed, put as much stuff as you could on an enemy, and then get more hit damage based on that. Then I read it a little closer and realized that even with 5 points in here, you can only put a maximum of 5 ailments, and you only got 7% hit damage per negative. So not only did you have to get all 5 of these ailments put into your build and then put them on the enemy, hoping that you had a 100% chance of each so you could do it on the first hit, you would only get 35% more hit damage out of it for 5 points. That's horrible. It was a waste of points. There were too many soft caps in this, and it just wasn't going to work well enough for the amount of hit damage. This should allow for you to put as many ailments as you want, but then they should cap it at maybe 20% per ailment, maybe 10%. Maybe it'd be too OP being able to do as many as you wanted, but you should be able to build into it more than having to put a point here per ailment. 5 capped is way too low. There's definitely more than 5 in game, and it's pretty easy to get the 5, but you should be able to do more than that. You should be able to build into things that you normally wouldn't build into. And the 7% per negative ailment just seems a little low. Maybe it should be 2% or something, and you can build it with points in there so it actually scales well per point, and not just 7% hit damage per point and then you have to have an ailment to go with it. It just seems like too much work for too little effect. Then we have Shatter. This gives Armor Shred chance and Armor Shred effect. This is converted to poison if you take the Scalebane node. You have Cross Forward, which will increase your melee range, useless if you're a bow character. You have Splinter, which gives more physical res shred. This is also converted to Poison Shred if you take the Scalebane node again. Then we have Death's Imprint, where they built Shadow Daggers into this a bit. Now, the cool thing about this is you can get a 100% chance for Shadow Dagger, and if you have enough Shadow Dagger effect, you can get the Plunge with just 1 hit, which meant every hit you did with Puncture would do the Shadow Dagger thing. My favorite thing about this was the only way that you could do a Shadow Dagger build with a bow attack, which was really cool. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work as well as the Shadow Cascade version, so why play it when you could just do it as a Blade Dancer and be really OP. Then we have Redouble, which gives bow hit damage per pierce. So every time that you attack targets and you pierce through a bunch, you get more hit damage for every time that it has pierced, and there's no cap on this, which is really cool. So if you can somehow line up a whole bunch of mobs in front of the boss and then pierce through them and hit the boss, it takes a little bit of setup, but if you do that, you get a lot of hit damage out of it, which is really cool, but it also really hard to do, and you're going to be taking a lot of attacks in the meantime. Next, we have Bloodthirst, which gives you bleed chance based on how many stacks of Bleeding Fury that you have. You get a stack of Bleeding Fury for hitting an enemy with Puncture. As long as you hit an enemy, you'll get a stack. You can have up to 3 stacks maximum. You can increase that by putting points into Hunger for up to 6 stacks maximum. With 4 points in Bloodthirst, you'll get 60% bleed chance per stack that you have. You can have those 6 stacks, which means you can have up to 360% bleed chance with 7 points invested here. Now, you'll keep all stacks as long as you hit an enemy at least once every 3 seconds. If you go longer than 3 seconds without attacking, you will lose the stacks. Now, that is a lot of bleed. 360% sounds like a lot. Even with this skill, if you min-max into bleed chance with everything between passives, idols, wearing the right weapons, everything that you do, you can get almost 3000% bleed chance with this skill. But unfortunately, even at that rate, it still just isn't that good for some reason. It isn't as good as being able to attack fast or having AoE of another skill. It does great single target damage, but unfortunately it just takes so much to build into that, and it still doesn't perform as well as other skills can, that many people have just left Puncture behind. Then we have Perforate, and this gives more bleed chance. Then we have Press the Attack, which gives Frenzy duration. So if you attack and hit at least one enemy, you gain Frenzy, which gives you increased attack speed, 20% increased attack speed for up to 2 seconds, which is really nice, but 20% attack speed really just isn't that much. But it is a nice buff, and it is a nice node inside of this skill tree. 1 point in Cadence of Death will mean that every third puncture you do will multiplicatively do more damage in a larger area. And then a really interesting node is Mutilate. Now, for every stack of bleed that you put in on a target, your third puncture will, instead of applying bleed, which means you'll have a little less damage because you're not going to be applying more bleed with that attack, it will instead consume all of those bleed stacks that are on that enemy, and you gain health per stack that was consumed, as well as all of those stacks that were consumed will deal all of their damage instantly. Now, I've messed around with this node, and while it is interesting and while it is fun, the problem with it is it doesn't apply bleed with that attack, so you're actually losing out on damage over the duration. Alright, and then the last 3 nodes that we have here is Toxic Delivery, which gives it additional poison chance. We have the Toxin, which gives it a chance to apply this toxin, which will make the enemy that has the toxin take 10% increased damage over time. I believe that is a more damage multiplier for it, so it's a lot more damage. You can get up to 10% more damage, but up to a 50% chance to apply it. It does not stack. And then of course we have the Sanguini Obsession, which changes all of the poison chance from all sources that you have, including idols, passives, everything, into bleed chance for the Puncture skill. And that is the opposite of what the Scale Blend does, which Scale Bane makes it to where all of the bleed chance from every source that you have is converted to poison. So you can build it either way. So to wrap up pretty much the entire overview of this conversation, Puncture needs to be able to scale better with more bleed or with more ailment chance, and have a higher percentage to begin with to make it more viable, more comparable to the other outliers that have better AoE or that have faster attack speed, so that it can compete with them on a greater scale so that more people would use it. Alright, that's going to wrap it up for this skill discussion. I hope you learned something, or that something gave you an idea for a better way that it should be changed to, and in that case go ahead and comment that below. At the same time that this is released, I will be releasing a Puncture teaser. Don't expect it to be an over-the-top build, it's just going to be a viable way to play Puncture as a melee build. I find it a little bit fun. It is an ailment type, but it does good hit damage as well. If you guys like the teaser for it and you guys are enjoying it and you comment on it and overall a lot of people are liking it, I'll probably do the full build on it. Otherwise, we might skip it and then just jump into patch 8.2 on Monday. Alright, that's going to be it for me. Remember, stay safe, travelers.